A few weeks ago, I'm talking with a client by the name of Tim and explaining how it's great that he's made it in such great shape to the end of the year. And Tim says to me, well, why is that? And I said, don't you remember back in April you had 10 key positions to fill? And he said, I completely forgot about that. I completely forgot we were in such bad shape back then. And that prompted me to do this video, which is the 28 things that I did in 2016. I took 41 flights with a total travelling distance of 158,031 kilometres, which equals a distance of travelling 12 times around the world in a plane. I saw Formula One legend Daniel Ricciardo in a private, closed session through the streets of the Perth CBD. I spent a week in Bali with the family and had some great snorkeling. A mechanic broke this part of my car and took from January 2016 until November 2016 to pay for it. I started using a stand-up desk and have been using it all through 2016. In Sydney at the Regional Growth Summit, I was MC and I was able to hear from Francis Frey and Salam Ismail, two great speakers. I went to Brisbane and ran a workshop, came back on the Friday night, got up on the Saturday morning and then went to Broome where I saw some amazing things. We saw the camels at sunset, I saw the crocodile farm, and I tell you, Broome has some amazing sunsets. I ran a 12-kilometre race with my wife, the first time we'd ever actually run an event together, and this included running through a tunnel in Perth, which is so much better than it sounds.
In a moment, everything can change. And I know my life would never be the same. The only one that's making sense to me.
We had a huge tree fall in the backyard, which almost took up the whole backyard. I drove an autonomous car, a Tesla, in self-driving mode for the first time. In Margaret River, in the middle of winter, we learned what happens when you get a bonfire and then you use a leaf blower to give it some more heat. I travelled to Portland, Oregon in the US and learned from famous Hollywood producer David Mann about how to structure a presentation to deliver the optimal value. Also, I helped Gazelle's coaches and talked about some of the new IP that we're introducing. I hosted a 2-day retreat for EO at this amazing house on the beach in Lancelin where they release carrier pigeons. I stayed at a hotel in Melbourne that is dedicated to the story Alice in Wonderland, and then I went to Sydney and I introduced a client to the Outthinker process by Kian Krippendorf, and we built a great strategy to help them to grow. Next, we had bees in our backyard. We had a swarm of bees that came into our backyard that we couldn't get rid of. And when we finally got rid of them because a beekeeper came, we had a second swarm of bees come in a few days later to our backyard.
Mr. Giles, welcome to Virgin Australia. It's nice to see you.
I started doing the $5 flight upgrade.
To say thank you very much.
Thank you. We'll be very happy with that. Hopefully you're Thank you.
Thank you.
I saw dolphins in the Swan River on my daily run. I spent a day of learning at TEDx Perth, a TEDx event that I helped to establish a few years ago. My eldest son turned 17 and then got his license to drive. I travelled to Dallas, Texas, flew over a place called Truth or Consequence. I had breakfast with Jack Stack, who is famous author of the book The Great Game of Business. I caught up with my friend Chris Kaplan in the States, and I saw how Texans like to decorate Christmas trees with shotgun shells. I taught my son Cam how to ride a push bike without training wheels, which was an awesome experience.
Well done.
I brought on a new client in Sydney where, at night, we went out to a Japanese restaurant called Sokyo, and there we had this amazing dish. I started and launched my own online training school where, through video, I'm able to help people to scale up their own business in their own time. I was featured in the US edition of the Huffington Post and the work that I've done with a client there, and then another client that I'd worked with, the North Carolina Chamber of Commerce, was subsequently featured in the US edition of the Huffington Post. I was featured in Bill Gallagher's Scaling Up podcast. And finally, we bought a house and then moved into the house, which means I get a new office. At the beginning of January, a lot of people are talking about the big things they're going to do, the big goals for 2017. But I thought it was really important to take a moment to look back, and I encourage you to do the same thing. Look back and think, well, what are all of the things that I've done in 2016? Because often you've done a lot more than you might have imagined. So take a moment and look back at what you did in 2016.
Suspense. Suspense.